information, communications, and technology consultant based here in the Mojave Desert. And I'm here to chat with you today on all things related to change management and machine learning and AI, right? Essentially the overlap of those two schools of thoughts, which is how do we change our organizations as we begin this process of including machine learning and AI into our business processes. So I'm going to give you a brief definition of change management, and then I'm going to get us hopping into today's conversation through one of my favorite quotes from the great Octavia Butler. But change management, this is directly from Wikipedia. Change management, sometimes abbreviated as CM, is a collective term for all approaches to prepare, support, and help individuals, teams, and organizations in making organizational change. It includes methods that redirect or redefine the use of resources, business process, budget allocations, or other modes of operation that significantly change a company or organization. And so I'm sure we all are aware or have heard about ChatGPT and the inclusion of machine learning and AI into the value streams of information workers and knowledge workers. In fact, if you've been following me at all, I've been talking about some of this stuff for quite a bit of time. What I want us to always remember or just be mindful of is that machine learning and AI have been included in a lot of our digital tools, products, and services for several years now. However, the rapid adoption of some of these tools is sort of hitting us all in the face right now, right? And so it then becomes important that we as individuals change and that our organizations change in response to this, to these new tools that are going to change the market, right? The market is changing in real time, and if our organizations are sort of moving like the Titanic, right? Well, ultimately we're going to hit that big old iceberg and we're going to sink to the bottom of the ocean. And we don't want that to happen, right? We want to be lean and mean and agile, and we want to be able to do what it takes to respond to the changing of times, right? And that's not an always easy process to figure out, which is why I'm here and why we're getting started today. So I'm going to go ahead and pull again just one of my favorite quotes from Octavia Butler, which encourages me, right? Octavia Butler states, and again, if you don't know Octavia Butler, she is a fantastic Afrofuturist author, science fiction author. Unfortunately, she passed away several years ago, but she's got a really great book called The Parable of the Sower that I would highly recommend that you read. And in that book, Octavia Butler states, "All that you touch, you change. All that you change, changes you. The only lasting truth is change," right? And so I just want us to be mindful of that. Change is going to happen regardless of whether or not we are prepared for it. And sometimes we are changing in real time and we don't know how we have changed, right? Yet change again occurs. And so that process of managing change becomes all of our responsibility so that other people know how to respond to us, right? And so that we are more knowledgeably responding to the changing of times. Because again, things are going to change. So in regards to today's video, I really just want us to understand the importance of incorporating machine learning and AI into change management, right? And you, again, might have already seen AI in the marketplace. Perhaps you've gone to your favorite website and you were chatting with a chatbot, right? Which, 10, 20 years ago, maybe that wasn't possible. But it does make certain organizations more productive, right? Because, let's just, for example, think about operating hours. If no one is available 24 hours a day, yet you can train a chatbot, a model to engage with your customers when you're not there, right? Well, that then is continuing to solve problems for your customer and move them further towards, ultimately the end of the process, which is ideally, becoming one of your customers and entering into a contract with you, right? Something else that is sort of underlying a technology like a chatbot is what's known as natural language processing. And again, these are some concepts that I would encourage you to study in your own time, and we will spend some time talking about today. However, if we just sort of consider this process of you listening to this video or you watching this video and being able to, in real time, process the language that is natural to me, right? And a lot of that is contextualized based off of region and industry and country and culture, et cetera, et cetera. However, machine learning, AI, some of these tools that or beginning the process of entering into our work streams, they can actually be trained to understand these large data sets related to language, right? So just something to be mindful of as we are considering this process of changing. What does it mean to change? And that, it sort of helps us to understand in a lot of different ways that language and conversations are mostly just tools, right? And the power of machine learning and AI is the inclusion or the collaboration of these digital tools with, this underlying school of thought related to machine learning, AI, in the form of natural language processing, then can create new methods of productivity, efficiency, and value for both us as knowledge workers and then ultimately our customers. And so, again, broadly, as it relates to our video today, I've basically broken this down in about 4 or 5 sections. We're going to be talking about the role of machine learning and AI in change management at scale. We're going to talk about what it takes to build a successful change management strategy. We're going to talk about, or I'm going to provide a case study from Airbnb, which I'm really excited about. And then I'll give you, again, just some best practices on some layup opportunities or some easy things that you can do. And then I'll conclude and get you out of here. Okay, so this is section 2, the role of AI and machine learning in change management. And broadly, I've just broken this down into 3 sections that we'll get through. So first is the benefits of machine learning and AI and change management. And so, if we're just sort of thinking about this process of changing, right, very broadly, we need to figure out what we are changing, why we are changing, how we are changing, where we're changing, and when we're changing, right? And so if we then consider, just some very broad buckets that I would encourage you to think about, it's sort of understanding, well, what are your inputs for change? Why is change required? What is going on that is forcing or compelling you as an individual or your organization to change something, right? And that then is, part of this process as it relates to, again, sort of understanding your inputs and your outputs as a result of this process of changing. And that, for all intents and purposes, is just this process of data collection, which we all do, right? It's being able to leverage, ideally, machine learning and AI in order to automate, perhaps, this process of inputting data or collecting the data, right? And then also this process for analyzing said data and then pushing it out somewhere, right? And that then is this process of understanding information systems. So another really great benefit of machine learning and AI is in understanding or being able to make some predictions of the analysis of said data, right? And so, if you are then inputting, a ton of emails into Gmail, for example, right? And you are having a conversation with someone week over week or day after day, right? If you use Gmail, you might receive a little notification in your inbox that says, hey, this person responded to you 3 days ago. Did you remember to reply back to them, right? And that then is an example of predictive analytics, which ultimately this tool is teaching you that, hey, your behavior is indicative that you should be doing something right now, right? And so it's then being able to partner with the artificial intelligence or with the machine learning, right? So that you can then change your behaviors or your organization's culture around said behaviors, right? And so this process of managing change is then, in my opinion, only illuminated is the word maybe I'm looking for here, through the use of predictive analytics, right? The illumination comes in the form of working or partnering with the machine learning to shed a light on perhaps, the data that you are not responding to or analyzing in real time because maybe you've just got so many things on your plate. And that then is another great opportunity for working with machine learning is in the form of measuring impact, right? And that, in using the same example of checking your email, working with your email provider to perhaps set up a weekly or monthly report in the form of the number of emails that you sent out last month, or the number of emails that you received or opened, or how many keywords that you wrote, et cetera, right? Machine learning gives us, for all intents and purposes, reports that we can then take to our organizations or analyze ourselves, so that we can figure out the most impactful ways to change our behaviors or to create a strategy of change, right? And so, I'm just giving I'll give you a broad example of how I like to use machine learning and AI in order to sort of change my behaviors. And I'll just go ahead and be perfectly honest with you. I've had to work a lot on my project management skills, and in college I was notorious for writing papers at deadline. And that then was one of the challenges. It reminded me of a recent experience applying for a grant, right? Where I only had about 24 hours to get the grant done. However, I had a pretty good idea of the application that I wanted to submit based off of a previous grant cycle, right? And so I just would need to update my programming, my language. And so all that I did was I quickly went through the grant, and I tried to break it down, right? I was creating a mental model in the form of understanding each of the questions that the grant makers were interested in having me to answer, right? And then I went into my Google Drive and, found some documents and pages that I had already built out that, again, just sort of outlined the program as I saw it. And then I would copy and paste some of my examples directly into the grant application, and then I would add additional language should I need it, right? Now, what was even more beneficial was then taking portions of that grant application in the questions and inputting it into ChatGPT and giving ChatGPT an additional prompt in order to then help me answer that question. And then that gave me a block of text that I could then read through and see if it, met my standards, and edited it down, right? And then, for all intents and purposes, I was able to get my grant in enough time. It was great. Now I'm happy, and hopefully the grantees are happy. But just the sheer fact that I feel more comfortable including that tool into my process is an example of how, as an individual, I am changing in real time based off of market dynamics, right? And so now ChatGPT is a tool that I pay for month over month, and I'm now integrating that tool into my workflow and my process. And so I'm gonna go ahead and link if you're watching this video on YouTube or on LinkedIn, I'll be sure to drop a link into a McKinsey study regarding ways that you can perhaps leverage or incorporate ChatGPT into your workflow or process. Again, all organizations are different, and so this process of change management, it sort of begins and ends with this analysis, right, of what you are changing and why. And in this particular instance, the one that I've outlined is that I have changed the way that I produce content by incorporating ChatGPT into the process. And if you've heard me talk about this concept before, it's like, if we know what the tool is, we need to understand what it is, why we're using it, where we're using it, when we're using it, how we're using it, right? And that is this process of assessing the tools or creating rules for them. All right, so this is section 3 of today's video, which is around building a successful change management strategy. And so broadly, this can be broken down into several sections that we're gonna talk about, right? First and foremost, it's identifying the scope of the change and the target audience, right? And again, just going back to, why are we changing? Change is always based off of our users, right? And being able to conduct needs assessments and requirements gathering is a super important process that I would highly recommend that you begin this change management process with, which is developing deep relationships and understanding of your end user, whether that is an internal teammate or an external stakeholder, right? So if you're saying, hey, something within this organization needs to change, okay, well, maybe a good place to start is to ask your teammates if they are feeling the same way, and if so, why, right? And that then begins this process of exploring needs. Why do we need to change? And, what's not working? How can we make this process or improve something within the organization as a result of creating change? And by developing consensus, that then, in my opinion, allows the change management process to flow a little bit more seamlessly. And so that then is just having a deep understanding of your stakeholder and the different jobs that they are responsible for. And again, just being mindful that our teammates have jobs, but our customers have jobs, right? Our customers have to do things in order to be able to take advantage of the value that we provide to them, right? And so it's being really mindful before we change a process or change something about the org. It's really in understanding, well, what do they want and what do they need in order to marginally improve their life as a result of the change? Because if we're not improving anything, then we might as well keep things the way that they are, right? Unless we're making a prediction on something. So just be mindful that your external stakeholders have changing options, and you want to be mindful of that before you begin this process of changing something. And that, in my opinion, is just having a ton of buy-in and data, right? You've collected a lot of data in the form of qualitative and quantitative research that help to reinforce your desire for change. But then that is, confirmed in logic and by other people. And so then the next step of this process is creating or establishing goals. I'm big on objectives and key results. So I try to choose 3 to 5 objectives, and then directly below each objective, I like to choose 2 to 3 key results, right? And so being mindful, it's not about changing just for changing's sake. It's we want to change for a reason. And so it's almost in establishing a new status quo, right? We are changing because of this reason. And that then, in my opinion, leads us directly to the next step of the process, which is developing a comprehensive communications plan. At all levels of our change management process, we want to be communicating and reinforcing our objectives and key results for the change, and then also explaining and documenting that process to our various stakeholders so that they are aware of what is going on, right? And we can do that via emails, we can do that via meetings, memos, reports, right? But the idea is that we want to be transparent and include our stakeholders in this process of understanding how we are changing and whether or not we are closer or further away from that goal as a result of initiating this process. And that then, again, once you've developed a communications plan, my next recommendation is in creating an implementation plan, and you clearly define that through milestones. And typically that's inclusive of your work plan, right? And being able to break down the work into broad chunks, and then task-based deliverables. It's understanding who your teammates are that are going to be helping you or responsible for this process. It's allocating resources, right? Perhaps in the form of budget or in gathering new tools. Perhaps recruiting external teammates or outsourcing some work. And then, doing 2 really important processes and reinforcing processes in the form of, assessing risk and then maintaining quality, right? We don't want to, create new and extra work when ultimately the goal of the change management process is to make things easier for us, right? And so if we're not assessing the risk and maintaining quality, well, then typically we are breaking more things that we are fixing, which is not the purpose of the machine learning or the AI. And so that then becomes really important to establish feedback mechanisms to monitor your progress and to adjust the plan if necessary. And that is this process of, working with a project sponsor and a stakeholder, and then working with your stakeholders in order to, gather and maintain feedback. Surveys should be, a key part of this process. User interviews should be a key part of this process. Again, these are like ongoing things in the life of this project, in my opinion. And that then it becomes super important to be transparent in the form of sharing your work with your stakeholders so that they can give you grades and let you know how you're doing before you finalize anything, right? And that then, will give you some insight into whether or not you need to pivot or adjust or change your strategy based off of the change that you would like to see. And so, at all levels of this process, machine learning and AI can be incorporated and included, right? And so again, if we're just sort of mindful of the feeding data into the AI, it's this process of, perhaps creating calendar reminders to schedule time with your stakeholders during the life of the project. It could be inputting a database inputting a data set into a database, right? That will then allow you to generate a report that you can automate and send out once a week or, something along those lines, right? But it does become an important part of this process, and this change management process is, you can quite literally, before you move over to the machine learning and the AI, you can use the machine learning and the AI to help you with the change, right? So be mindful of that. And so this next section of the video, we're going to talk about a quick case study from Airbnb regarding the successful implementation of machine learning and AI into their change management process. And so, I'll link to the actual article in either the LinkedIn video or the YouTube video. But Airbnb, if you're unaware, is a very, very, very successful technology organization. I believe they're based in Silicon Valley. However, their business model is all around matching inventory of homes and to users, typically travelers, and facilitating a network for all intents and purposes. So they have a network of open homes and homeowners who are interested in renting out their properties to travelers, and you have travelers coming from all over the world who need a place to stay, right? And Airbnb's technology creates an opportunity to match the inventory to that need, right? And so what Airbnb did was developed a machine learning process in order to predict the value of some of the different homes that could be found on Airbnb, which can then give insight to them as a platform to create a better recommendation algorithm for both for both sets of customers, right? And so if you think about that, it's, we're looking at a house as a unit. Depending on, that we can take some qualitative description of the house, we can take quantitative description of the house, right? Qualitatively, it's a 3-bedroom, quantitatively, it's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, right? Which then gives some insight into the number of people that could potentially stay there, right? And then perhaps what the zip code might provide some insight into median home values, right? Perhaps the house has a pool, or perhaps the home has a jacuzzi, or, there are all sorts of data inputs that Airbnb is collecting regarding each home found on that inventory to then make some recommendations to the owner of those homes around pricing, right? Because, when you're in the hospitality game, it's all about beds and heads. If you've ever managed an Airbnb property before, you really want to make sure that each night your home is booked in order to maximize your return, right? But again, customers and being empathetic to the number of options that they have, they might not be able to afford your home, you might not meet all of their needs, right? And so Airbnb's job is to quickly help both sets of customers find each other, right? They want lots of happy marriages of beds in heads. Heads in beds, right? And so in this blog post, one of Airbnb's employees describes how Airbnb used machine learning to predict that all-important business metric of the value of homes found on Airbnb. And so it walks you through their entire workflow and process, from an engineering perspective, right? But again, a lot of that is rooted in what we just got done talking about in the form of natural language processing. There's natural language as it relates to being able to describe what a home is, right? And how much a home is worth. And so that then helps to inform their model selection, the way that they decided to analyze and incorporate machine learning and AI into this process. It helped them to prototype a solution. It helped them to move through prototypes to then release versions of the website into production, right? Into an environment where users could test their changes in real time. And then, it sort of wraps with lessons learned, with the reflective, right? With lessons learned, the tools that they use, and, bits of their code, which if you're not a, complete nerd, you might not be interested in that part of the process. But, arguably one of the most exciting organizations in Silicon Valley is leveraging machine learning and AI into their process, right? From a very natural and organic perspective, in that they understand that understanding as much about homes or the inventory found on their website is like the most important thing ever, right? And for all intents and purposes, perhaps, they weren't able to gather or collect that data from their customers, right? The homes or the homeowners, right? And so they created a model in order to then be able to predict the price of a home and then make recommendations to those customers on how they should then price those homes on a nightly basis in order to then ensure that demand was being met, right? Which is a beautiful case study in my opinion. And so, what they were able to ascertain as a result of that is they're able to, once they had the model in place, well, then they could fix it, right? And make it cheaper and easier to run, which is great. Once you begin the process of incorporating machine learning and AI into your change management process, well, now it's out in the open, right? And then you can figure out ways to optimize and make it better. And that's the beauty about machine learning, is that the more data that you feed to it, the better it becomes and the more efficient it can operate, right? It sort of talked about the notebook-driven design, which reduces barriers to entry, which is something that we want to be mindful of. Again, there might be a high barrier to entry as it relates to incorporating machine learning into our change management process. But again, going back to that previous point, it does become easier the more that you use it, right? So just be mindful of that. It might be difficult in the beginning, but more often than not, change is not always comfortable and not always easy. And that's why we do it, right? Because we know that if we don't change, it's going to get more uncomfortable later or after the fact, right? So be encouraged there, please. And that validation, right, the third learning was that now that teams could see in real time, there was a real case study that machine learning could actually help. People then started using machine learning at will, right? They started using machine learning and AI into their processes and to further refine their products and services, which is the beauty in all of this, right? Is that, by developing a culture that is responsive to change and is encouraged to change, well, then people will change as needed. Okay, so this next section of the video, before we get out of here, is all about best practices for incorporating machine learning and AI into your change management process, which hopefully you've been able to take some nuggets and walk away with them here today. But again, it really begins and ends with your customers or your users, right? So that you can then begin the process of understanding the tools and the systems that they're already using. And that then becomes, the importance of selecting the right tools and the right technology as part of this process. And there's a discipline required in the form of assessing each of your tools to then understand why they are not working or how they can be improved, right? And that then is becoming a subject matter expert in individual tools so that you can assess them, right? And then this process of developing a toolbox is in understanding how your tools are integrated, how they work together. How does your calendar tool work with your email tool that works with your CRM, right? And I like using this analogy of like a hammer or a screwdriver or a power saw, right? It's how are we using these tools? What are some of the features associated with them? And how can we either improve them through machine learning and AI, or, how do we move on to something else, right? If it can't be improved. And that then helps us with our change management process. So the next thing I want you to be mindful of, again, is ensuring that your data is quality and accurate. And, it's not fun, typically. Maintaining data integrity is not always the easiest thing to do. But if you can streamline this process of understanding the data that is being inputted into your information system, and then understanding the information that is being output from your information system, it's then you can create some data governance standards. And so, hopefully I'm not beating to death this example of emails, but it's, if you understand that you're receiving 50 to 100 emails per day, well, how do you ensure that you're not going crazy and overwhelmed with the number of emails, right? And if you are receiving 50 or 100 emails a day, well, how many emails are you sending out, right? And that then is just sort of an example of the data that you're pulling into your system and the data you're pulling out of a system, right? But it's understanding then that your emails don't work in silo. Typically, your emails need to be, they are relating to like different projects that you're working on. And so it's then an understanding, well, how does your email work in collaboration perhaps with your project management software, right? And so, and how is data flowing from your email into your project management software? Is that, do you need to create a document that you download and download a PDF and attach that to a project in your project management software? And if so, how are you ensuring that that data is not corrupted, that it's accurate, and that it meets your standards, right? Because other people at that standpoint are relying on that information. My next process as it relates to change management and incorporating machine learning and AI into this process is providing accurate training and support for your stakeholders, whether it's like your internal teammates or your external customers or vendors, right? And that before you change something and allow machine learning to take over a job that someone was typically doing, it's in my opinion, dedicating and maintaining time for skills-based training and then task-based training, right? And both of those things, if you can really iron out what those processes are, they typically allow the machine learning to work better, right? But really, dedicating and having documentation around the different skills that are required for individual tools, and the different tasks that are responsible for different tools, and how machine learning and AI are going to be incorporated in order to help facilitate that process that you plan on changing or offloading. And again, trust and transparency and maintaining those are big parts of the process. I think I want you to judge yourself non-judgmentally, which is a conundrum in a lot of different ways, but ultimately, over-communicating tends to be better than under-communicating. And, even when your models aren't perfect, even when the change isn't perfect, it's better to get feedback from others before you go down a rabbit hole that you can't get out of, right? And, to teammates and to your stakeholders, like not only will they typically judge you gently, but it shows that you are a valuable person and that you're willing to be vulnerable and that you don't know everything and that you're willing to get feedback, right? Which, for all intents and purposes, develops deeper levels of trust and a desire to collaborate, right? People want to help each other, and if you are being vulnerable and saying, "Hey, I need some help here. I need some feedback," people are typically more than willing to give that to you. And just having those feedback loops in place, dedicating and saving time for surveys and customer interviews will help to reinforce and maintain that trust and integrity. And then also sharing some of your wins, right? Share what you're excited about and what you like, and see if other people consider those to be wins so that you can then expand on those. This last step of this process, in my opinion, is adapting to changing circumstances and feedback. One of my favorite quotes by the great Mike Tyson is that everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth, right? And, as beautiful as your plan is, as your tools are, and how machine learning and AI are going to help incorporate and change things, and the world's going to be a better place, well, we all know that the world is not that neat and not that easy. And so just being adaptable and understanding when you need to pivot is an important part of this process. And you can rely on the machine learning and the AI if you're, in my opinion, incorporating these tools into this process, to make some recommendations for you to avoid some of the challenges that you might not be able to see through your own vantage point, right? Which is a benefit of that process. But be adaptable. Understand that you need to change with the times, right? You can't just do things the old way anymore, and you're gonna have to learn some things. And we talked about this in previous weeks around upskilling and reskilling yourself, right? A lot of the software and the tools that we're using, it's not like, they really, the software developers release them one time, they release them and they iterate, they improve them, and they take away features. And there is a bit of a discipline around, not getting too comfortable with your tools and becoming a forever student, right? And understanding, what it takes to maintain the integrity of said tools, and, how they are changing and how they are adapting to the changing times, right? And so that then is that last part of the process, which is getting feedback, right? Going back to the beginning, Harry Potter nerds, you know this, you close at the open, or you open at the close, excuse me, which is, now that you've gone through this entire process, it's going back to the requirements that you had established, that change management plan, and to see if your strategy has checked everything off of the checklist. All right, team, so that is all that I've got for you today. Just as a quick recap of today's video, we talked about the role of machine learning and AI into the change management process. We talked about what it takes to build a successful change management strategy. We walked through a quick Airbnb case study around the inclusion of inclusion of machine learning into the way that they produce and launch websites, right? Well, particularly the way that they were predicting the value of homes found on websites so that they can then update their recommendation algorithm. And then I provided best practices for incorporating machine learning and AI into your change management process. So some key takeaways that I hope you walk away with today is that AI and machine learning, they're not going anywhere, and that, again, they've been part of your tools for quite some time, but now it's just becoming a lot more prevalent. So I would encourage you to change yourself so that you can change others. Change at scale is all about iteration, right? We are constantly changing, we are constantly growing. And so being, just gentle on yourself is understanding that these are all works in process, and it becomes important to remember to stay disciplined on iterating, right? We want to constantly be iterating, and then understanding when we need to kind of like pull back a little bit and assess the new lay of the land. But, that process, it is in understanding how the market is changing, right? And then so the most fascinating part of this conversation to me is that AI and machine learning can quite literally teach you how to change this process of incorporating AI and machine learning into your processes, right? So, relying on these tools is important, but then in understanding their underlying logic, right? And we talked briefly about natural language processing, which machines aren't that great, as it relates to, some of the nuance of human communication and language, right? And so that's why, in my opinion, AI and machine learning aren't things to be scared of, right? Because they're not human. And so you are the subject matter expert in what it means to be a human. And so in understanding the underlying logic of these tools can then help you to understand their limitations, right? And that gap is an opportunity for you to shine, right? So be mindful and be encouraged of that. So hopefully you found this video helpful. I would encourage you, if you have additional questions around machine learning, around AI, feel free to shoot me an email, follow me on LinkedIn, or subscribe to my YouTube, or connect with me on Medium. Or definitely feel free to send me an email. My email address is myfirst.last@gmail.com. I'd love to have a chat with you. But thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day. Bless up. Take care.